All right, so we're diving deep into Gothic literature today, specifically, how it reflects all those anxieties of the times it was written in. Uh, the excerpts you sent over, those were fascinating. Really explore this connection across, well, a bunch of different historical periods.
Yeah, and it's amazing to see how these anxieties kind of morph and shift, over time across these different periods. But like one thing that's really striking is how Gothic lit, it consistently acts as this mirror to society's fears, no matter the era.
Totally. It's like holding up this dark, distorted reflection, being like, "Hey, look at what you're afraid of."
Exactly.
It's really, really interesting. So let's start with, let's go way back to the French Revolution. That was obviously a time of like massive, massive upheaval, violence, just chaos in general.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And all that turbulent atmosphere had a huge influence on early Gothic literature. I mean, think about it. Like people are living through this intense period of terror and uncertainty, right? And the Gothic, the genre, it gave them a way to process that, to work through all those heavy emotions.
You mentioned in the excerpts The Monk by Matthew Lewis.
Mhm.
I'm curious, like, for people who might not be familiar with it, could you give a little rundown? I mean, I've read it. It's a wild ride.
Oh, it is, yeah. So the monk, it's a story about this, monk who, well, he gives into temptation, right? And he ends up committing some truly horrific acts, and it's got all this corruption and lust and a good dose of the supernatural, just to spice things up.
And, it's so interesting because when you think about the French Revolution and what was going on during that time, I mean, how does this book, like, specifically connect back to those anxieties?
Well, think about the imagery, right? It's vivid, it's disturbing, and it would really resonated with people, who were living through the revolution. Like you've got the monk, this figure of, religious authority, but he's corrupt. And that would have tapped into this fear of unchecked power, particularly, power of the church, which during the revolution was, I mean, that was a major source of anxiety, right? Because all these traditional structures, all the authority, it was being challenged, it was like the whole world was turning upside down. And then you've got the violence in the book, which, I mean, it's graphic and it mirrors the very real violence that people were seeing, out on the streets.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost like the novel is taking these extreme scenarios, these, almost fantastical elements, and it's using them to tap into this collective fear of societal collapse that really defined that era.
Exactly. It's like it's this dark fantasy playing out, but it's reflecting these very real, very deep-seated fears.
Okay, so then let's move on. Let's fast forward a bit to the Victorian era. We see a shift, right? I mean, the anxieties, they're different. Now it's rapid industrialization, changing social norms, the expansion of the British Empire. It's a whole new world, really.
It is, and Gothic literature, it reflects this, right? Like it evolves to reflect these new
Yeah,
anxieties.
yeah. It's almost like they were like grappling with the consequences of their own progress,
Yeah.
Like, hey, we've made all these advancements, but what have we unleashed in the process?
Right, exactly. And two of the big ones, from that era that really capture this are Dracula and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I mean, what's so fascinating about these stories and what the excerpts really highlight is this fear of losing control, of the boundaries between good and evil becoming all blurred.
Oh, for sure. That comes across so strongly, especially I think in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Like
Yeah.
that whole idea of this duality of human nature. It's like
Mhm.
the Victorians were afraid that underneath all this veneer of civilization, there was this darker, more primitive self lurking,
Yeah.
and it could burst out at any moment.
Yeah, and Dracula too, right? You have this theme of invasion, of contamination, which I mean, you can connect that back to anxieties around disease, around foreigners, fears that were definitely like heightened during a time of global expansion.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like these external threats that become like metaphors for these internal struggles. And speaking of external threats, the excerpts also mention Heart of Darkness.
Really?
It's a powerful but deeply unsettling book. How does that fit into the broader anxieties of the Victorian era?
Well, Hark of Darkness, it reflects these anxieties about the other, right? The people, the cultures that the British Empire was encountering, through colonial expansion. And the way the novel portrays the Congo, it's so dark, so unsettling. It really taps into that fear, that uncertainty surrounding these unknown territories.
It's almost like they were venturing into like the heart of their own fears,
Yeah.
projecting them onto these foreign landscapes.
Yeah, it's a really powerful exploration of the psychological impact of colonialism, both on the colonizers and, of course, the colonized.
And, this might seem like a bit of a jump, but the excerpts also brought up Jane Eyre, which I have to admit, at first I was like, huh, really? Because, when I think Gothic, I think like creepy castles, supernatural beings, all that classic stuff.
Mhm.
But Jane Eyre, it's more about like psychological torment and societal constraints. It's more internal.
Exactly, but that's what makes it so relevant to our discussion here. I mean, Jane Eyre, it might not have all the overt supernatural stuff, but it uses all these Gothic elements to explore the very real anxieties that women in Victorian society were facing. Like, it highlights how oppressive those patriarchal structures were, with Jane constantly battling against these societal expectations, these limitations that were placed on her simply because of her gender.
So it's like, even though it's set in this, seemingly ordinary world, it still captures that sense of confinement, of powerlessness that you often find in Gothic literature. It's really interesting how the genre can adapt to explore all these different facets of anxiety.
Totally. And that's part of what makes it so enduring, I think. Its ability to speak to these deep-seated fears, regardless of the specific time period.
And, bringing things to the present day. I mean, Gothic literature, it's still thriving, right? It's still
Yeah.
super popular.
Yeah.
But what anxieties does it reflect now in contemporary society?
Well, what's interesting is that contemporary Gothic literature, it's kind of evolved, It's become this really powerful tool for social commentary. It's not just about ghosts and monsters anymore. It's about exploring, these very real anxieties about our modern world, about the things that keep us up at night.
Yeah, yeah. Like the excerpts talked about these two recent novels, Mexican Gothic and The Little Stranger.
Yeah.
And what struck me is how they take these classic Gothic tropes, like the eerie atmosphere, the isolated setting, and they use them to examine these really, really relevant issues. So, we've journeyed from the French Revolution to the Victorian era all the way to the present day. And I think it's clear, like Gothic literature, it's always served as this reflection of society's anxieties.
It's a genre that's constantly evolving, constantly adapting to speak to the fears of the moment.
Yeah, and it's amazing to see how it, despite its often like dark and unsettling nature, it continues to resonate with readers, across centuries.
It really does. And this brings me to a thought-provoking question for you, our listener. What contemporary anxieties do you think, could be explored through this lens of Gothic literature? Like, what about the climate crisis? Or the rapid advancement of technology, or the growing wealth gap?
I mean, those are some chillingly good points. It
Yeah.
definitely makes you wonder, what shadows are lurking beneath the surface of our modern world, just waiting to be brought to life through the power of Gothic storytelling.
Right.
And with that, folks, that's our deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
Let us know, if you decide to explore any of these spine-tingling tales. And happy reading, if you
Yeah.
dare.
Yeah, if you dare.